say how sorry you are, what really happened, whatever.
Right. So we're talking about circumstances where somebody has caused the death in a driving situation. All my clients, and unfortunately I've had Italians and Chinese and Frenchmen over the last 12 months who have been in this situation, all my clients are advised by me to immediately make some form of contact. Usually, who the driver is not an issue, but often the culpability is an issue, but you can convey condolences for the accident, for the death, without admitting culpability.
Okay, that's interesting.
It's really important to do that very early and for it not to look calculated and delayed. Because if it's calculated and delayed, how can it be really seen as genuine?
Yes, and that's the point I think I was trying to make, that it might look as though you're trying to do something to get off or mitigate the case in your favour or influence in some way. So that strikes me as legally dangerous, at least.
And we don't have the best phone line, but I just want to ask you, why did the judge criticise the police in this respect as well? The case he thought was not handled well.
Sorry, I'm just pulling over to hopefully to improve the Bluetooth. But the judge, from my reading of it and from your repeating of it now, reads as though he's criticising the police because sometimes they forbid contact. Goodness knows why, because they're quite wrong in doing that, because it certainly helps the victims to know that the person is not callous and indifferent.
Yeah, and it certainly in this case seems to have had a reasonably profound effect on the community, judging by all the reportage of the case. I understand. So
I don't want to suggest in any way that I disagree with what Michelle's evaluation, because I do. It would normally be that you would not be admitting culpability, but I'm not suggesting that. What I'm saying is that my clients are advised that you need to do this by way of condolence, because there's a death regardless of you admitting culpability.
Okay, so I understand that, but can you come to my point that it might look as though you were trying to create some sort of influence through that contact, not by actually saying anything about the case, but just by trying to present yourself in a favourable light to the victims?
Well, it could do. That would be a very harsh evaluation, wouldn't it? Because most people do want to express some sympathy.
Yes, okay.
It was a complicated case, complicated by lots of the things that Brian's alluding to, but thank you. So there's, for legal reasons, normal human contact, decent human contact is not necessarily stifled. That's the point.
Not at all, not at all. And sometimes police officers do put barriers up about that, but then you go over their heads. You go to a more senior officer and you say this is essential.
All right. Thank you, Anne Stevens, on the panel. Just before we go, a little snatch of a song. I thought this might be a nice way to end. Played in the chapel at the funeral today for that very brave man, Police Prosecutor Mike Toon in Palmerston North, and he was swept away in the Manawatu River, saving his daughter Kelly. You will always be our hero, she said this afternoon, so our condolences to his family and to all the police colleagues who are among the hundreds who came to say farewell. And this was played in the church Dire Straits, Brothers in Arms. Thought it was a nice way to go out for Mike Toon today. Thank you, Michelle.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Brian.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Jim.
Oh, yeah,
Merry
we won't
Christmas,
see you before.
oh dear.
That's right.
Indeed, and
Merry
to you
Christmas,
too.
Brian.
Merry Christmas to you too.
Yes.
John Campbell's Checkpoint coming up. Thank you, everybody.
Wonder what
Well, I don't know what was happening then. It was quite nice to have some silence, just sit here meditatively with Katrina and a cup of tea. Coming up on Checkpoint in 45 seconds from now, Bill English's dance card is filling up. Social Housing Minister Paula Bennett and Transport Minister Simon Bridges both put up their hands to be his deputy. They got 3 hectares of land for $10 in 2014. Now Victoria University plans to sell it for close to $20 million, but it's not a decision popular with everyone. The youth justice age raised. Solid Energy won't do an interview about the sealing of Pike River, but they are answering their own questions in a paid open letter, which is also a newspaper ad. And Gerald Hope confirms he's met with Scott Watson, the man convicted of his daughter's murder. All of that and more. Just checking the pips are still there. Coming up after 5.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Batt and tēnei. The race for the deputy leadership of the National Party is on, with Paula Bennett declaring she'll contest the position. Her cabinet colleague Simon Bridges announced his intention to run for deputy just hours earlier. Here's our deputy political editor, Chris Bramwell.
Both MPs said they would prefer to work with Bill English, who, along with Jonathan Coleman and Judith Collins, is contesting the National Party leadership. Paula Bennett says she has great respect for Mr English and they've worked very closely together in recent years. Simon Bridges says he's heard from his colleagues that there's a strong desire to see rejuvenation and change, and he thinks he offers that alongside Mr English. Bill English hasn't indicated who he'd like to have as a deputy, and it will be the caucus who decides anyway. National Party MPs will meet at Parliament on Monday to vote for a new leader and a new deputy. Atuiti whare pāri māta ko Chris Bramwell aho.
The government has announced changes that will mean most 17-year-old offenders will now be dealt with in the youth justice system. The Justice Minister, Amy Adams, says the vast majority of the teenage offenders are lower risk, but she says those who commit violent crime will continue to be dealt with in the adult courts.
We have to have the ability to ensure that it works in each case for each offender, that society has confidence that serious offenders will be dealt with seriously, but that equally we're doing all we can at those early stages to stop offenders going on to a life of crime.
Amy Adams says about 4,500 cases will now be dealt with in the youth justice system. The changes will be brought in by 2019. Indonesian search and rescue teams have been using earth movers to clear rubble after dozens of buildings collapsed in the northern province of Aceh when a 6.4 magnitude earthquake struck today, killing people and trapping others. The National Disaster Agency says the earthquake was felt strongly and many people panicked and rushed outdoors as houses collapsed. Some media reports say as many as 24 people are dead and scores more are injured. It was not immediately possible to verify those reports. The Corrections Department has been ordered to pay more than $172,000 in reparation to family members of a man killed while doing community work. WorkSafe, which brought the charge, says it's the largest reparation order for a case it had brought to court. Tracy Neal was in the Nelson District Court.
26-year-old Robert Cave was killed in 2014 while on a community work placement in Wakefield, south of Nelson. The father of 4 was crushed by a log he and another man were cutting with a chainsaw. The department was earlier found guilty of failing to take all practicable steps to ensure Mr Cave's safety. Chief District Court Judge Jan-Marie Doog said he could not have refused to be in a hazardous place. She said the failure by corrections was systemic rather than willful. This is Tracy Neal.
The Secondary Principals Association says it might be time to review what's taught in maths and science. New Zealand's scores in international tests of 500,000 15-year-olds fell very slightly, but educators had been hoping for a recovery following a big drop in the 2012 round of testing. Association President Sandy Paisley says teachers and principals will be disappointed with results from the program of international student assessment.
Always we've got to be looking at how we can do things better, and particularly I think it's time to really review those curriculums, particularly maths, science, and see if what we are actually teaching in terms of content and the way we're teaching it is matching what the best practice is.
Sandy Paisley says research is needed to find out why New Zealand's scores have fallen since 2009. Members of a Balclutha marching team got in a fight with a truck driver who tailgated them on a South Island highway. The team was returning from the South Island Marching Championships in Nelson on Sunday night. Constable Josh Clausen says the truck driver tailgated, tooted and made obscene gestures on State Highway 7 between Murchison and Springs Junction. There was a fight when the vehicle stopped at a petrol station. Paramedics treated 2 women in their 20s and 40s for minor injuries. Constable Clausen is urging the truck driver and any witnesses to come forward. Traffic has increased markedly on the highway after the 14th of November earthquake closed State Highway 1 around Kaikoura. It's 4.5 minutes past 5. To sport, and Kevin Barry, the trainer of New Zealand heavyweight boxer Joseph Parker, says he and his prodigy aren't afraid of the biggest challenge of their careers. Parker will face Mexican-American Andy Ruiz Jr. for the vacant WBO World Heavyweight title in Auckland on Saturday. Ruiz is coached by world-renowned trainer Abel Sanchez, a man with 17 world champions to his credit. Barry himself is yet to train a world champion, but he believes that'll change this weekend.
When this fight was made, forget about being a coach, as a boxing fan, and the people I spoke to said this fight is a great fight. I've always thought that this is the best heavyweight matchup of the year. This will be the most exciting fight in the heavyweight division this year.
Barry and Sanchez both expect the fight to go the full 12 rounds. The Black Caps are lamenting a disappointing bowling and fielding performance after surrendering the Chapel Hadley one-day trophy to Australia in Canberra. Australia took an unassailable 2-0 lead in the best-of-3 series with a 116-run win in Game 2. The home side posted their biggest ever one-day total in Australia, making 378 for 5 after the Black Caps opted to bowl after winning the toss. Paceman Tim Southey says they can't blame the toss, but can blame their first innings effort.
Fielding's an attitude. It's something that each individual has to own and go about their business. It's something that we pride ourselves on and have done over a number of years, and yeah, it is disappointing to be dishing up substandard bowling performance and fielding performances.
Tim Southey, the third and final one-dayer, is in Melbourne on Friday. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Auckland, Then and Now. The title of Jenny Howarth's photo book comparing the past with the present. Simon Morris is back for another session at the movies, just ahead of the school holiday season, and the situation in Aleppo. Mike Seawright from Relief Aid talks about the plight of a people in the bleak heart of Syria's civil war. It seems whoever wins, they lose. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Wellington, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, and the central high country also wide at upper. Cloud increasing today, rain spreading from the west overnight, then turning to a few showers tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay fine today with increasing high cloud, scattered rain tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, patchy rain, heavier and more persistent about the Sounds and Western Ranges, easing to isolated showers later tomorrow. Nelson, Buller and Westland rain with heavy falls, clearing overnight or early tomorrow. Fine spells increasing tomorrow, but isolated showers persist in Nelson. Fiordland, remaining rain, clearing this evening. It'll be fine tomorrow. Otago and Southland, cloudy today with scattered showers, becoming fine tomorrow, but cloud persisting about coastal Otago. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy, rain developing tomorrow night. It's coming up to 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. We begin tonight with Paula Bennett and Simon Bridges, who've both today backed Bill English in his bid to replace John Key as National Party leader and therefore also, of course, as Prime Minister. Both today have said they would like to be his deputy. Both Bridges and Bennett are seen to be ambitious, and there had been some early speculation they would put their names in the ring to be leader. But the two ministers, who are both in their 40s, although at either end of the decade, with Bennett the older of the two, are setting aside any leadership bids to back English for the time being. Why and what would they offer as Deputy Leader and Deputy Prime Minister? Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Three-term Tauranga MP Simon Bridges, who is the Minister of Transport and Energy, was first out of the blocks for the deputy leadership, holding a midday press conference at Parliament. He told reporters he expects Bill English will win the leadership, and that's the basis on which he's standing for deputy.
Bill English offers the strength and stability that we need at this time. But I think what is also really clear, and what's come through very strongly, is that there is also a strong desire to see that rejuvenation and that change, in a sense that we're listening 8 years in. And I think I offer that and the ability to provide that to my caucus in spades.
40-year-old Mr Bridges stresses that he's a good balancing act with Bill English.
I'm a younger generation, I am a contemporary New Zealander, I represent an entirely urban electorate. I have a good sense of the pulse there.
A couple of hours later, Social Housing Minister and Upper Harbour MP Paula Bennett ended speculation she could possibly make a tilt at the leadership, announcing she's keen on the number 2 job.
Look, I've got a fantastic relationship with Bill. I've worked really well with him for many years. Him and I have been been absolutely invested in the social investment approach amongst other things. I do see myself working really, really well with him, and it's up to Bill.
Mrs Bennett says she thinks she has something different to offer from Simon Bridges.
I'm definitely someone that's a bit different, and I think that I've been 2 years now in the kitchen cabinet. That's given me a really richness of experience, but I don't know, I bring an energy, I've got an enthusiasm, I just love people, I love this country.
Bill English hasn't indicated who he'd like to have as deputy, and it will be the caucus who decides anyway. Meanwhile, John Key had his last question time in Parliament this afternoon as Prime Minister. The final question to Mr Key in his role as top dog came from the Green Party co-leader James Shaw, who subjected him to a torturous series of dad jokes.
Is the real reason that New Zealand's productivity is so low because every working age New Zealander has been bored to death listening to Bill English?
You're right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, if that's his test, then I should introduce him to his own caucus colleagues, and then they're not exactly people I want to party with when I leave Parliament. Let me give you a clue.
The Leader of the House, Jerry Brownlee, made sure it was John Key who got the last laugh.
In his long and successful tenure as Prime Minister over the last 8 years in this House, does he recall a day when the Greens have put more effort into their questions? You're right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, no, but it's good to see they're getting the hang of it, because they're going to be asking questions for a very long time.
National Party MPs will meet at Parliament on Monday to vote for a new leader and a new deputy. Depending on how long the voting takes, an announcement could be expected any time after midday. Atu i te whare pāremata mō te hōtaka o te ahi ko Chris Bramwell aho.
And we'll have more on the leadership bid later in the programme. 5:11. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. One of the most controversial and criticised aspects of youth justice in New Zealand is to be consigned to history. The youth justice age is to be raised to 18, meaning 17-year-olds previously dealt with in the adult system will now appear before the Youth Court. The Law Society, the Children's Commissioner and the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child were among those calling for the age to be raised. Andrew Beecroft, who's now Children's Commissioner and was former Principal Youth Court Judge, says the decision is very welcome.
I am extremely pleased. This is excellent news. At long last, we're being brought into line with virtually all the rest of the Western world. The government needs to be congratulated. You know something, John? It's the right thing to do. It's right for 17-year-olds. It will deliver better outcomes. It will stop them being sucked into the adult criminal justice pipeline. It's the best chance we have, really the community's last best shot, and I'm really glad that we're doing it for 17-year-olds. And I look forward to the youth justice system demonstrating that it can and will deliver.
Not all 17-year-olds, and that's not me raining on the parade, because I totally agree with you, credit where credit's due, and it's good of you to give it. But 17-year-olds who are serious, violent offenders who commit a range of offences like murder, manslaughter, sexual assaults, ag rob, arson or serious assaults will continue to be dealt with by the adult courts. Do you understand that?
Two things to say about that. Murder and manslaughter has never been within the youth court jurisdiction, so there's no issue there. Second thing is we're talking about a small group of 17-year-olds, some of which would have been convicted and transferred to the district court in any case. But the third thing to say is, myself, I see this as a two-step process. I think in the same way that the youth court deals with 14, 15 and 16-year-olds and makes the decision now as to whether to keep in the youth court or move to the district court, sometimes the prison, and there's about 20 under 17-year-olds in adult prison now. In the same way that we're doing that for 14, 15 and 16-year-olds, I'm sure there will soon be the trust that the youth court can do that for 17-year-olds too. So I'm seeing this as a big step forward with a small step to come in the future to complete the deal.
Okay. Do you think people don't understand the youth court very well? In other words, do you think that the critics of this, the kind of people who want 17-year-olds to be in the adult court system, think the youth court is a soft touch?
You are dead right. And I guess after 15 years as Principal Youth Court Judge, I take some responsibility for that misinformation. But most of this debate has been predicated on a misunderstanding of what the youth court does. It holds young people to account. It has a suite of options, the top end of which includes adult prison or 6 months in a youth justice prison, lock and key. So there are some pretty tough options that have been and always have been available to the youth court. That's not well known. In fact, I went to the Indian Association a few months ago and explained the full array of sentencing options that were available in the youth court. I think they would say they did not know that sort of tough, when necessary, approach was available. Too often, as I've often said, it's seen as a sort of a kumbaya, thinking, Milo drinking, slap on the wrist with a wet bus ticket. John, it's not. I mean, we need a youth justice system that holds people to account, that holds serious offenders to account as well, and provides transformative change. That's what the youth justice system
And that's the key
do.
phrase. Transformative change is the key phrase, right? Because if you can stop a child from going right off the rails, then actually we all profit from that, don't we?
Absolutely. And look, I can't say hand on heart every single 17-year-old we deal with that will happen to, but I know this, there's more chance of it happening in the youth justice system than the adult system. So that's got to be good for the country.
That is Judge Andrew Beecroft, who of course is the Children's Commissioner and former Chief Judge of the Youth Court. The time on Checkpoint is coming up to 16 minutes past 5. We're going to go to Wellington now, where 2 kindergartens are devastated. The university, which owns the land they're built on, is selling up, saying they'll be forced to shut. In 2014, the government gifted the Teachers College, the former Teachers College site in Karori, to Victoria University for $10. But 2 years on, Victoria University is on selling the land, reported to be worth around $20 million. And as Alex Ashton reports, the kindergartens on the site are desperately trying to stop that sale happening.
$10 doesn't go far in real estate. But 2 years ago, $10 secured Victoria University 3.7 hectares of prime Karori real estate. The university now wants to sell the land. However, 2 not-for-profit kindergartens run on the site and say the land they sit on is being sold from underneath them.
We just believe that this has been a shoddy practice.
Amanda Colston is the chief executive of Whānau Manaaki, the former Wellington Kindergarten Association. Under that comes Campbell Street Kindergarten, on the site up for sale, which about 120 children attend. Ms Colston says, essentially, the Ministry of Education gave the land to the university. The university then went back to the government asking if it wanted to buy any of the land back before it went on the market. Ms Colston says the ministry didn't want to.
We're saying they need to carve off us and the childcare centre. We've been there for years.
35 years, specifically. She estimates the 2 centres sit on between 1 to 2% of the total land, are worth about $900,000 and sit right on the edge of the lot.
And it would be really easy for them to carve it off and just say, look, we will sell off all the rest, but we'll keep the kindergarten and the centre operating here on the terms of the lease that they've had for the last 30 years.
Harriet Cartwright's daughter Tilly's finishing up at Campbell Street soon, and she wants her other daughter to start next year.
It's worrying
that
nobody seems to want to make it, either the Ministry of Education or Victoria. Nobody really seems to want to make it their problem.
Just up the road from Campbell Street Kindergarten is Karori Kids, also on the university's land.
I think we're the innocent victims in a badly managed process between the Ministry of Education and Victoria University.
Karen Schofield is chair of Karori Kids, which has just over 20 children. But she and Amanda Colston at Campbell Street both say the university is pushing responsibility to the ministry and the ministry to the university. Ms Schofield says it doesn't cost anyone to keep them there because they pay the rates and the maintenance.
Actually, in the last 8 years, we've invested $138,000 into the property, which was a decade's worth of fundraising and saving to be able to do that. And now Victoria University are looking to profit from our own investment.
So, what does the university and the ministry say about the situation? Well, late this afternoon, both sent through statements. Neither would be interviewed. Victoria University's Vice-Chancellor, Professor Grant Guilford, says they understand the concern of the kindergartens and is meeting with them both. It says it wants the kindergartens to, quote, enable their continuity in a manner that is fair to them. The ministry says it's unable to buy the land because it can only do so for schools and not early childhood centres. It says it met the university last week and the 2 parties are still discussing ways to keep the kindergartens up and running. For Checkpoint, Alex Ashton.
Coming up on Checkpoint, after 10 years, Gerald Hope finally gets to meet the man convicted of killing his daughter, and 3 weeks after the Kaikoura quakes, our reporter Conan Young meets a family still cut off. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. You may have opinions on the aspirants for the position of Deputy Leader and therefore Deputy Prime Minister. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, and of course we are on Facebook. Solid Energy has released an open letter saying it is reckless for uninformed people to claim the Pike River mine could be safely re-entered and paying for it to be published in the New Zealand Herald. The state-owned enterprise once again declined our invitation to be interviewed, buying advertising space instead. This follows an increasingly angry campaign from some Pike River families for the drift or entry to the mine to be searched for any bodies that may be there. Former mines rescue personnel from both New Zealand and the UK have said they're so convinced they could safely enter the drift that they would be prepared to do so themselves. But the SOE and the Minister have repeatedly insisted it is not safe and entering the drift would put more lives at risk. And while interviews have repeatedly been declined, they've now bought newspaper space to get their message across. Rachel Graham reports.
The open letter was today published in the New Zealand Herald. No one was available for an interview from Solid Energy, but in the letter it says in November 2014, after a thorough assessment of the safety of re-entry, a decision was made that it was too dangerous and could not be made safe. It says there have been no improvements in the conditions in the drift since the decision was made.
Out of respect for all those involved, we wish we could continue quietly getting on with the job. Acknowledged by the families back in November 2014 as the safest course of action, to seal the drift and hand over the mine to DOC. That was a decision made on the basis of rigorous assessment and careful consideration. Nothing's changed to alter that decision. It's reckless of those who aren't in possession of the full facts and have no legal responsibility for the lives of those who would be put at risk to claim otherwise.
In the letter, Solid Energy specifically drew attention to 7 points which it believes have been misrepresented. One of those is that the techniques being used to make the drift safe for sealing can be applied for full drift re-entry. It says as part of the sealing process it degassed 10 metres of the 2.3 kilometre tunnel in a complex, tightly monitored and managed operation. But the spokesperson for some of the Pike River families, Bernie Monk, says the letter shows that Solid Energy is worried about the ongoing protests at the gates to the mine.
It's telling me that furthermore they obviously don't want to communicate with us properly in a manner that we've asked for, and I think it's great that they're explaining it to the families and to the public on the whole, but it still doesn't draw away from us knowing that this job can be done.
Marion Curtin's son Richard Holling was one of the 29 men who died in the mine, but she doesn't support the protests over the sealing of the mine. She wasn't willing to do an interview, but confirmed she wanted her son's remains undisturbed. In a statement, she said,
"We never wanted re-entry into the mine for reasons of safety and cost, let alone sacrilege and futility. His remains are there, but not his spirit."
Marion Curtin also defended the outgoing Prime Minister John Key. She said he had never promised to recover the bodies, only that what could be done would be done. Today, one of the Prime Minister's would-be replacements, Judith Collins, said the work to seal the mine should continue and the site should be dedicated as a memorial tomb. Checkpoint has asked the other candidates, Jonathan Coleman and Bill English, what their position is, but they both declined to comment. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Rachel Graham.
Yes, let's pick up on that point from Rachel there. As the leadership contenders for the National Party and therefore the role of Prime Minister furiously work to get caucus support, we wanted to know more about them, specifics, policy questions, where they stand on major issues. So we emailed 7 questions to their offices, all of them related to issues very much in the public domain at present, like Pike, for example. Will you implement personal tax cuts in 2017? Will you raise the age of eligibility for New Zealand superannuation? Will you allow Pike River to be sealed without the drift being searched? Will you offer Winston Peters a cabinet post if that's what's required to secure a coalition deal with New Zealand First? Will you give the Reserve Bank power to impose debt to income lending restrictions on the housing market? Will you continue the current arrangement with David Seymour and Epsom? Would you want to retain your current cabinet portfolios if you are not elected leader? They were the 7 questions we emailed. They all declined to answer. We're going to keep pushing at this because we think this is material. This is not only a Miss and Mr. conviviality contest, it is also about policy and where they want to take the country under their leadership. But last night during interviews on this program, Jonathan Coleman said he would not cut taxes next year, and he has remained consistent over the past 24 hours about that. And Judith Collins said she would work with Winston Peters and give him a cabinet post if that was required to keep National in government, and she would seal Pike River without the drift being searched. We'll keep plugging away on those issues. Gerald Hope has confirmed to Checkpoint he has met with the man convicted of his daughter's murder. Mr Hope has been campaigning for the past 10 years to meet with Scott Watson, the man who was found guilty of murdering his daughter Olivia and her friend Ben Smart in 1998. Mr Hope told Checkpoint he had 2 3-hour meetings with Mr Watson at Rolleston Prison early last month. Meanwhile, Watson yesterday fronted the parole board in his second bid for release. His father, Chris Watson, was also there. He told our reporter Tim Graham he's hopeful but not overconfident of his son being freed.
There's this catch-22 thing where you can't get out of unless you've done these courses, and you can't do the courses unless you admit your guilt to your particular crime. And so the logic of the whole thing sort of escapes me.
He hasn't been allowed to do the courses because he denies the crime.
Exactly. You've got it. That they didn't make a decision instantly is a good sign. We must have at least one of them on our side. Yeah, we can only wait and see.
What sort of signals do you think the board was sending out yesterday, or indications?
I'd like to think they were positive, but the psychiatrist that's on the board, as much as came out and said he was never going to get out as long as he didn't admit to his crime. And if there was no positive progress this time, I'd counsel Scott to not bother with the damn thing anymore. Just settle in and let them do what they want to do.
Just give up on seeking parole?
I would. I mean, yeah, their thinking is so, bizarre, I suppose is the only word to call it. I think we'll just carry on trying to get this conviction overturned.
How did Scott feel yesterday went?
He didn't expect much, and I think he thinks that we did all right. I mean, he's done a lot that they wanted done. He's done quite a bit of education. He's employable. He has driver's license. He has half of the qualifications for a building apprenticeship.
Are you expecting for the board to come back and say that he can be released?
I would love that.
How likely do you think that is?
I don't know. Given the mindset of the powers that be, I would say it's not overly likely, but I would like to think it is.
That's Chris Watson speaking to our reporter Tim Graham. The parole board has reserved its decision but expects to announce it within a fortnight. The queue began last night, and by this morning it was snaking down one of central Auckland's main streets. But it wasn't hordes of Christmas shoppers waiting to get their hands on a new iPhone or a must-have toy. It was people hoping for a Christmas food parcel and a present for their kids from the Auckland City Mission. The Mission's Christmas campaign kicked off today, and already 250 people have been through its doors already, and the campaign only began today. Joanna McKenzie reports.
On Auckland's Queen Street this afternoon, there were no heaving queues of Christmas shoppers. At Santa's Enchanted Forest at upmarket department store Smith & Coe's, there was no wait to see the big man in red, just a gentle stream of parents, grandparents and children who've paid $30 to see Santa. But 500 metres away, up the steep climb of Wellesley Street and a left turn at St Matthew's Inner City, it was a very different story. 250 were queuing, at least one from 11 o'clock last night, to make sure they got their parcel. Emma was one of the first in the queue.
Since 4 o'clock this morning.
And why did you feel you needed to come down at 4 o'clock?
Because I know that this place will be very, very packed today because it's the first day of the City Mission thing today. Yeah. Windsor there, they help us with money-wise and stuff, and food parcels for our families and presents for the kids for Christmas. As long as this poverty thing keeps going, yeah, we're going to be here.
Holly arrived a little later than Emma. She'd been waiting patiently since 6 o'clock.
This is my first year. Money's tight. Yeah. We don't live in a perfect world. You know, we're all on benefits, these people. My friend told me that there's sometimes queues around the corner, so I thought I'd better get here early.
Once inside, people were given a food parcel, Christmas presents and a meeting with Work and Income, who advise on emergency grants. 50 volunteers will help with the campaign every day until December the 23rd. The City Mission expects to support more than 4,000 people by then. Alexis Sawyers from the mission says Christmas just adds to the pressure people already feel throughout the year.
It's really hard when you live in poverty. The thought of not being able to provide for your children every day is difficult, but particularly over Christmas when, they're seeing the same sort of advertising that all the other children see, and the thought of not having a gift for your child is just heartbreaking.
Alexis Sawyers says the need is increasing and the problems are getting worse for many, not better.
The reality is that Auckland is an incredibly unaffordable city. I know we hear that over and over, but the reality of what we see at the mission is that when you've got nothing, you can't stretch it further, and the more expensive things become, it just means the less money you have. So food becomes a discretionary item.
Back in the queue, and Holly says it's tough on everybody getting through this time of year.
If there wasn't a housing crisis, there wouldn't be all these homeless people waiting for the City Mission to open for breakfast. Yeah, well, we don't live in a perfect world. We're all on benefits, these people, and we all get, $100 for accommodation supplement when rent's $410 for a 2-bedroom. If we're in surplus, why aren't we getting more?
Christchurch City Mission will start its Christmas campaign on Monday, while Wellington City Mission will continue to work with the families it already supports. In Auckland for Checkpoint, called Joanna Mackenzie Tene.
Coming up on Checkpoint, two former senior Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade staff, MFAT staff, received compensation and a public apology from the State Services Commission. And education leaders say they're disappointed by New Zealand students' poor scores in a flagship international exam in reading, maths and science. But what does that really all mean? But before all of that, Katrina Batten with the RNZ headlines.
The race for the deputy leadership of the National Party is on, with Paula Bennett declaring she'll contest the position. Her cabinet colleague Simon Bridges announced his intention to run for deputy just hours earlier. Both MPs said they would prefer to work with Bill English, who along with Jonathan Coleman and Judith Collins is contesting the National Party leadership. The government has announced changes that will mean most 17-year-old offenders will now be dealt with in the youth justice system. The Justice Minister, Amy Adams, says about 4,500 cases will now be dealt with in the youth justice system. However, she says those who commit violent crime will continue to be dealt with in the adult courts. The changes will be brought in by 2019. Indonesian search and rescue teams have been using earth movers to clear rubble after dozens of buildings collapsed in the northern province of Aceh when a 6.4 magnitude earthquake struck today, killing people and trapping others. Some media reports say at least 24 people are dead and scores more are injured. The Corrections Department has been ordered to pay more than $172,000 in reparation to family members of a man killed while doing community work. Robert Cave was crushed by a log while working at a church property in Wakefield, south of Nelson. WorkSafe, which brought in the charge, says it's the largest reparation order for a case it had brought to court. Solid Energy says it will not change its plan to seal the Pike River mine simply because of the opinions of poorly informed commentators. The state-owned enterprise today published an open letter on its website and in a full-page advert on the New Zealand Herald outlining its reasons for going ahead with the sealing. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Thanks, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with our man in Wellington, Jonathan Mitchell. Hi, Jonathan. Further news about strength in the economy?
That's right. Last night, you remember we had those solid run on truck movements from the ANZ data. Tonight, we've had a really strong showing in job advertisements in the month of November. Really solid right around the country, except for Canterbury. Canterbury's doing its own thing, really, as the rebuild starts to slow. Certainly strong demand for construction and manufacturing workers around the country, especially in the likes of those regions going gangbusters with the housing market. And it really shows that construction, tourism and migration is really giving the economy a good nudge at the moment. It's really pushing it along. There are some headwinds though, some bugbears biting for employers, and that's the availability of skilled staff, something that's coming through in a lot of data sets at the moment. And that may really lead to some wage pressure, some wage inflation, which would be good for getting that CPI, the Consumer's Price Index, up back into that target band 1 to 3%. It's really hovering at around nothing at the moment, 0.3%.
So tourism, migration, construction, the service industry, people who work with the tourists, booming. What about dairy? Some new figures out because obviously, as we all know, tough times there. How's that faring?
We had another rise at the overnight auction, as we've been reporting today. It's the fourth consecutive rise in the dairy auction, really getting some solid momentum from about the middle of the year onwards, which is a good sign for dairy farmers. Whole milk powder back into that range of break even, over $3,000 a tonne. We're starting to see some good demand from overseas, especially in China. That's continuing, and production has pulled back, which is supporting prices. More important though, today a lot of the banks have raised their own forecasts for what they see as Fonterra will pay for this season. ANZ, Westpac and BNZ now sitting well over $6 a kilo of milk solids. ASB, who's been quite ahead of the other banks this year, ahead of the pack, they're still sitting on $6 a kilo, which is where Fonterra is. Just a point, Fonterra is holding its annual meeting tomorrow in Darfield. We don't expect them to raise their forecast, but we're going to hear probably a lot about how the performance of the company, performance of the season is going.
Thanks, Jonathan. We will be covering that tomorrow night, of course. What happened on the markets today?
Well, point of note, over in Australia, they had some economic growth numbers contracted in the 3 months to September. The first contraction in about 5 years, fell 0.5%. If we get 2 quarterly falls, that would tend to lead to, a downward trend for their economy. So the NZX Top 50 index back here, though, fell 21 points, ends at 6,890, and the dollar hovering around 71 US cents and 95.5 Australian. John.
Jonathan Mitchell, thank you very much. Jonathan Mitchell is our Wellington-based business reporter. We looked before at Solid Energy, who wouldn't front for an interview but have taken out an ad, an open letter, about the dangers of entering Pike River, even the drift, in the New Zealand Herald. And we have received an email immediately from the West Coast, and I'm going to read it out. Trust Solid Energy Management to put a full-page ad in the Herald. A lot of readers of that down here. The bankrupt SOE's reason for not doing the drift walk is illogical, as one overseas expert recently stated. If too much risk is the reasoning, then scrap all board of directors for the mineral sector, as their indulgences killed 29 and caused a $390 million loss at Solid Energy. And now these inept hypocrites, honestly held opinion by Peter Ewan, expect people to believe their expertise. Give us a break. Dr. Goebbels, who was a propagandist, of course, would be well pleased with their particular strategy of no fronting for the questions. Gutless wonders. There is a lot of anger coming into the program from the West Coast about what is happening there, and it turns up night after night, and that from Peter Ewan is a pretty striking example of it. Let's go to Wellington. 2 former senior Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade staff have received compensation and a public apology from the State Services Commission for being treated unfairly in an investigation. It marks the end of a long and somewhat bewildering saga on occasions that dates back to leaks about a ministry restructure in 2012. Looking at this for us is our political reporter, May Heron.
Derek Leese complained in 2014 to the Ombudsman's office about how the State Services Commission handled an inquiry led by Paula Rebstock. That inquiry was over leaks to then Labour Foreign Affairs spokesman Phil Goff on the restructuring of MFAT, and it singled out Derek Leese and colleague Nigel Fife, saying they had opposed the restructure. Neither men were responsible for the leak. Earlier this year, the Ombudsman criticised the Rebstock inquiry, saying it was flawed and unfair and caused significant damage to Mr Lease's reputation. It said the State Services Commissioner, Peter Hughes, should apologise and pay compensation. Today, Mr Hughes did that and said, in the interest of fairness, also extended it to Mr Fife.
I do recognise that in the course of the investigation, Mr Leese and Mr Fife were treated unfairly, and that this caused significant stress to both themselves and their families. I have met with Mr Leese and Mr Fife and their families, and I have apologised to them in person.
However, Mr Hughes wouldn't apologise on behalf of the former Commissioner Ian Rennie, who left in June this year, or Paula Rebstock, who led the investigation, which has been called a witch hunt by those involved.
No, I'm apologising for the treatment of both Mr Leask and Mr Fife. Through the process of the review, and there are a large number of people involved in this, through the process of the review for the findings and for the way in which that was put in the public arena.
Mr Hughes won't say how much the compensation was or if the same amount was paid to both employees, but did say it was large enough to need ministerial approval. Derek Leask is a former diplomat and had worked for the ministry for 43 years. He says right from the start it was plain the Rebstock inquiry was off the rails. He says he's pleased with today's outcome.
I feel that this is a very important result for Nigel Fife and for me, for obvious reasons, but I think it's also a very important result for public service integrity. I think it's a good day for both of those.
However, Mr Leask says it's been a long, tough battle.
Well, it should have been resolved a lot sooner, but things didn't work out that way because the former State Services Commissioner did not take the what I viewed as the correct approach to dealing with an Ombudsman's report.
The Auckland Mayor, Phil Goff, who received the MFAT leaks in 2012, has said in the past that the $500,000 Rebstock inquiry was a colossal waste of money. He wasn't available for an interview today, but said in a statement,
"The apology and compensation vindicates two well-respected diplomats who I had the pleasure of working with for 9 years. The witch hunt against these two people is a sad episode in the history of a ministry that has served New Zealand well."
Paula Rebstock has carried out many reviews in the public sector and for the government, and the State Services Commission says it will continue to use her despite what has happened. From Parliament for Checkpoint, May Heron.
We'll hear more from Derek Leask later in the program as he tells us what he's made of all of this. We'd love to talk to Paula Rebstock. We've tried repeatedly to do so when the Ombudsman's report came out and again today. Paula, if you're listening, you've got our producer Bridget Burke's number. Give her a call and we'll put you on air. It's 90 minutes to 6. New figures show just how serious last month's earthquakes have been for the people who work in the capital. Over 11% of all office space in the central city was shut down as a result of the quake. This is the equivalent of 167,300 square metres, so 167,000 square metres of floor area, half of it in what is officially classified as prime building stock. The impact of this on Wellington is big. Here's Eric Frickberg.
As was predicted years ago, a major quake could make many buildings in Wellington unusable, even if it didn't bring loss of life. And the economic impact of that would drag on for months, if not years. CBRE is a commercial property manager which keeps track of office floor space in the central business district because it has to, because it needs to know what might become available for sale or for rent. Its head of office leasing, Matt Hint, says a lot of tenants were displaced by the earthquakes, producing a scramble for somewhere else to place a desk and place a computer.
People weren't that prepared and still aren't that prepared to compromise on, earthquake safety of these new buildings. So, look, buildings that had a pretty good seismic credential have all but gone. So it's pretty tough going for tenants now coming into the market.
Matt Hintz's report shows that quake-driven closures had affected 50 tenancies, from small businesses with 100 square metres of floor space to the Inland Revenue Department with almost 28,000 square metres. He says some of these displaced people are anticipating short-term disruption, but others are bracing themselves for the long haul.
The leases that have been struck are all between 3 months and 2 years. And the vast majority are sort of measured in 3 months to 6 months. So it is a pretty temporary sort of thing. By middle of next year, I think things will have normalised. A lot of folks will have gone back to their primary residence or place of business.
In another development today, a Wellington City Council crackdown on building owners came a step closer with the receipt of special powers from the Minister of Civil Defence, Jerry Brownlee. In a statement, Mr Brownlee said most building owners had cooperated with the council, but there might be a handful of owners reluctant to obtain or provide their own building assessments. He said he'd invoked legislation from 2002 to allow information to be obtained. The Mayor of Wellington, Justin Lester, says he'll now take action, granting the council's recovery manager special powers.
This gives us an opportunity to sit down with building owners and say, look, we want to see your assessments, and it also gives us an opportunity to plan for the future with the building owners around earthquake strengthening if it's required, or around making buildings safe so that we can weed out buildings that haven't performed or are at risk of not performing as they should in a future earthquake.
The Property Council says it's got no problem with the new rules. Its Wellington President Mike Cole says public safety is paramount.
Some building owners do need a bit of a hurry along checking their buildings and advising their tenants, etc., as to what the status is. There's new regulations that are in place now, but there's also been regulations in place that the owners were hopefully working to as well. We all just need to come up to speed with what the new regulations are and what those ramifications might be.
The main thrust of the Council's first actions will be aimed at commercial buildings which have been damaged. For Checkpoint, Eric Frickberg.
Education leaders say they're disappointed by New Zealand's scores in a flagship international test of 15-year-old skills in reading, maths and science. The results are the lowest this country has recorded since the Programme for International Student Assessment began in 2000, although our rankings have marginally improved due to falls by other countries. Australia, I think, has slipped below us, for example. Science teachers say they were hoping for better. Secondary principals say it's time to review the curriculum, and a maths teacher says in some ways we're all to blame. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen went out looking for some answers.
The government has predictably been highlighting the good news in the flagship international test results. A slight improvement in New Zealand's rankings compared with other countries in all three subjects, and the fact that small drops in our scores are not statistically significant. New Zealand is still above OECD averages, but the scores are now the lowest they've been since testing began 16 years ago. Science was the major focus of the latest round, and the president of the New Zealand Association of Science Educators, Chris Duggan, says the result, a score of 513 points, is disappointing.
We've improved our rankings on the country comparison chart, but we have failed to improve our results from the last PISA as a nation. So I think despite the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment's Curious Minds initiative, which started 3 years ago, we've seen no improvement in the science knowledge of our 15-year-olds, which is really disappointing.
New Zealand's lowest score was in maths, with 495 points, nearly 70 points behind the league table leader, Singapore. That gap is equivalent to 2 years of education. Jake Wills, who runs a website for maths teachers, says it reflects society's attitude to the subject.
In New Zealand, we have a very large culture where it's okay to say, I'm not good at maths. It's not okay to say I can't read or I can't write, but it's perfectly socially acceptable to say to someone, I'm no good at maths. And I think that's kind of starting to trickle down through all of these results that we're seeing.
The president of the Secondary Principals Association, Sandy Pasley, says teachers and principals will be disappointed with the results. She says it might be time to review what's taught in maths and science lessons.
Always we've got to be looking at how we can do things better, and particularly I think it's time to really review those curriculums, particularly maths, science, and see if what we are actually teaching in terms of content and the way we're teaching it is matching what the best practice is.
An Auckland University education lecturer, Fiona L., says the results show the gap has narrowed between the average scores of rich and poor students, but it's still too big.
There's plenty of evidence, and the OECD report's very focused on equity, that socioeconomic status has a huge impact. And I think we're going through a time of quite rapid social change in New Zealand, where socioeconomic status differences are being exacerbated, and that's going to be reflected in education.
Fiona L. says poverty needs to be addressed, but schools also need to focus on techniques that help close the gap. For Checkpoint, John Gerritsen.
Let's go to the United States now. With just over 6 weeks left in office, President Barack Obama has offered up a sweeping defence of his administration's record on national security and counter-terrorism. But at the same time, he warned that America will not be able to wipe out terrorism simply with military might. His successor, Donald Trump, didn't appear to be listening as he laid out his own military policy. Elizabeth Brown reports.
Barack Obama chose MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida, to defend his security record in front of a group of US military personnel. During his term in office, he has faced sharp criticism over his approach to fighting terrorism, with Donald Trump even accusing him and Hillary Clinton of being the co-founders of Islamic State. In his speech, Mr. Obama argued that his administration has been able to make al-Qaeda a shadow of its former self and had put Islamic State on its heels, but he said terrorism would remain a threat.
We know that in some form, this violent extremism will be with us for years to come. In too many parts of the world, especially in the Middle East, there's been a breakdown of order that's been building for decades, and it's unleashed forces that are going to take a generation to resolve.
Mr Obama said while the US has not hesitated to act when there's a threat, his administration had purposely focused on supporting local forces in foreign conflicts.
I've also insisted that it is unwise and unsustainable to ask our military to build nations on the other side of the world or resolve their internal conflicts, particularly in places where our forces become a magnet for terrorists and insurgencies.
In a message aimed at the new Trump administration, Mr Obama said a long view of the terrorist threat had to be taken and what is needed is a smart strategy that can be sustained. For his part, the president-elect on his thank you tour of the US visited the Fort Bragg military base in North Carolina, which has deployed soldiers to 90 countries around the world. Donald Trump laid out a military policy that would avoid interventions in foreign conflicts and instead focus heavily on defeating Islamic State.
We will stop racing to topple foreign, and you understand this, foreign regimes that we know nothing about, that we shouldn't be involved with. Instead, our focus must be on defeating terrorism and destroying ISIS.
Mr Trump vowed to rebuild the US military, which he says has been stretched too thin, but said America must stop investing in destructive cycles of war.
We've spent, at last count, $6 trillion in the Middle East. And our roads have potholes all over. Our highways are falling apart. Our bridges are falling. We got to start spending on ourselves. But we've got to be so strong militarily, like we've never, ever been before. Remember that.
Donald Trump also introduced his choice for Defence Secretary, General James Mattis, known as Mad Dog, to the crowd, describing him as the right person for the job and urging Congress to approve a waiver to let him take on what is a civilian position. For Checkpoint, Elizabeth Brown.
A vigilante tyre slasher has struck again in the Wellington suburb of Miramar, near the airport, Strathmore, Miramar. Over recent months, frustration has grown to slashing point amongst locals at the number of people parking in suburban Cody Street and leaving their cars often for weeks at a time while they fly away on holiday. For those of you who don't know Wellington Airport, those suburban streets are really close to the terminal, walking distance, easy. Catherine Hutton reports.
At least 7 cars had their tyres slashed on Cody Street, while others also had notes left on them by another victim, urging the owner to report the damage to the police when they return. One local resident, Connor, said the problem had worsened in recent months.
Occasionally it kind of blocks vehicle access, it makes the street quite difficult to drive, and at the intersection it kind of blocks a wee bit.
Cowley Street resident Jan said one car parked outside her home for 6 weeks while the owners went away on holiday. She's also had to get a car towed, which was parked right outside her garage and left there. Jan says it's a real problem because she has no off-street parking at her home.
You can't do much because they park proper parkway, but when you go for just 5 minutes for shopping and come back, you got no parking. And whole street like really full, everywhere car park.
Another woman who did not wish to be named said she feels very sorry for the victims.
I personally think that it's diabolical. I think that it's unjustified. I think that the person doing it must have a really bad guilty conscience. And I'm actually ashamed to say that I live in Carey Street because of the fact of all these tyre slashings and that sort of stuff. I really feel sorry for the victims.
Another local, Victor, said over the last 2 weekends he's seen between 20 and 30 cars with slashed tyres on Cowley Street. He says the inconsiderate parking on the street has not affected him personally, but it is obvious some people are getting quite upset by it.
We have received a couple of notices from the police to keep an eye on any suspicious activities, but I would suggest that notices should go up in this area saying hidden cameras are in operation, which may deter these culprits doing damage to other people's properties.
Greg Thomas from Wellington International Airport says the company is very sympathetic to the residents' concerns about parking. However, he says the problem has nothing to do with the amount charged to park at the airport.
Wellington Airport's pricing is very comparable to other major airports in the country, but while there is free and unrestricted parking available nearby, some people are going to want to use that. People aren't driving into the airport and then driving out again. They're planning to park in that particular area.
The capital's newly elected mayor, Justin Lester, says consultation with locals will take place in the new year.
So we want to make sure that the streets are tidy, that they're clear when they need to be, and that there's a good opportunity for residents to park and visitors to park in around the area as well. So it'll be a combination of traffic resolutions.
However, Justin Lester says the tyre slashing is reprehensible behaviour, and in some cases it has also targeted locals, not just those using Kāori Street as a free car parking alternative while they travel. For Checkpoint, ko Catherine Hutton tēnei.
5.5 to 6. Let's go to Kaikoura. And a bit of a change of subject there. This is about surfers and the impact of the earthquake on their brakes. Surfers feel it may have ruined one of the best local brakes, but on the other hand, perversely, it seems to have made other brakes much better. Regardless, the rising of the seabed has already taken its toll on fins, boards and bodies. Phil Pennington and Claire Easton Farrelly compiled this report from the rocky break called Meatworks, which is about 10 minutes north of the town.
22-year-old Louisa Schoppmeier from northern Germany has already had a close encounter with the round bowling ball-sized boulders below the now shallower surf at Meatworks.
My new Christmas present, it would be really nice if that would be a helmet, you know, because you just feel safer.
Did you say you hit your nose?
Yeah, I've got a little scar here still.
On what?
Well, I tried to dive under the wave and it pushed me down on the rock, so my face was just going down on the rock. I don't know, I came back up and couldn't feel my face. I was like, Tried to pedal to Phil to ask, like, hey, how do I look like? I can't feel my nose. And he was like, Jesus Christ, you're getting out of the water now.
She's here with Philip Alabaid from the Czech Republic, who loves to surf when he's not working as a chef in a Kaikoura pub. They've only paddled over to Mangamaunu once from Meatworks on a small swell, and it was really shallow.
Because the whole earth lifted up for about 4 meters, so the point break wasn't working yet. Maybe with the right swell, it might still be amazing long waves into the bay, but we're all hoping.
Are you saying that maybe it's ruined?
Might be. We all hope it's not, because it's like one of the best surf spots here.
Philip says the raised seabed makes the surf more hollow, and intermediate surfers would be wise not to paddle out at Meatworks on a big day. He points to a small rock sticking up. It's tapu, he says, and would normally be hidden in this tide, but is now exposed.
The whole break, the break has certainly changed its character, but it's still on. It's still good, you know. It's still good surf.
Is it better or worse than it was?
It's hard to tell. We've only had a handful of serves.
Surfers are an optimistic lot, and he's waiting for a consistent northeaster to judge Mangamaunu.
There's certainly a couple of breaks in town that have improved, and a couple of breaks that might have gone worse.
Which ones have improved?
I think that Kautra is pretty good, and we'll have to see what's going to happen with the right swell and to be able to judge exactly what's going on with the surf here in Kaikoura.
In town at the Coastal Sports Shop, Rusty Boyd is also singing the praises of the post-quake kahutara, or as they call it here, Kautra, right-hand point break out by the airport.
I've been out a couple of times, just down at the Kautra. Yeah, it's a little bit different. It's still really awesome. I've had a lot of fun. Still got its punch compared to a lot of other waves. I've been up north and had a look at Mangamanu. It's definitely changed. It looks like it's twice as long, so potentially it could be twice as good. Meatworks is shallower. Basically everything with the uplift has gotten shallower, so at the moment it's still just getting out there and getting a feel for the new break.
Oh, mate.
Back at Meatworks, and Philip Alabaid is suited up and about to paddle out. He says he's got plenty of friends dead keen to try out the remade waves once they can get into the isolated town. His first surf here post-quake ended with him needing stitches under his arm after his fin hit him. But he and Louisa, stitches and scars, are undeterred.
And you could say, like, you were, the first?
On
the new wave?
Yeah, some of us were, yeah.
That's pretty cool, because how often does that happen in the world?
Yeah, pretty special. It is pretty special. It's always been a special place, and it's pretty special.
From the remade Kaikoura surf breaks, Phil Pennington.
Thanks, Phil. Feedback on the candidates for the deputy leadership position of the National Party under Bill English, because they're both backing Bill. I'm worried about the prospect of Simon Bridges as Deputy Prime Minister while he had oversight of work safety, and in the face of rising fatal forestry accidents, all Mr Bridges did for months was deny, says Paul from Takapuna. Thank you, Paul. And Mark is commenting on Paula Bennett. Is she going to bring something different, energy and enthusiasm, as she says, to the deputy leader role? Well, those are all things people say when they know they're not qualified to do the job, says Mark, who describes Paula Bennett as the least qualified by far of all comers. Not an overwhelming amount of support for either Simon Bridges or Paula Bennett from the feedback we've received. Coming up to 6, more on Paula Bennett and Simon Bridges after the news. An actor with name suppression appears at the Auckland District Court facing 12 sex assault charges, and 2 former senior MFAT staff received compensation and a public apology from the State Services Commissioner. We talked to Derek Leask, who was one of them, about this pretty extraordinary episode. All of that after the pips and the news.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. The race for the deputy leadership of the National Party is on, with Paula Bennett declaring she'll contest the position. Her cabinet colleague Simon Bridges announced his intention to run for deputy just hours earlier. Both MPs said they'd prefer to work with Bill English, who along with Jonathan Coleman and Judith Collins is contesting the National Party leadership. Paula Bennett says she's had great respect for Mr English and they've worked very closely together in recent years. Simon Bridges says he heard from his colleagues that there is a strong desire to see rejuvenation and change, and he thinks he offers that alongside Mr English. It'll be up to caucus to decide. National Party MPs will meet at Parliament on Monday to vote for a new leader and a new deputy. The Labour Party is welcoming the government's changes that will mean most 17-year-old offenders will be dealt with in the youth justice system. Labour's justice spokesperson Jacinda Ardern says many have been pushing for this to happen over the last few years, but she says it must be properly resourced.
It is clear there is a lot of pressure on that system, but it does work very, very well. So those pressure points should not be a reason not to make this change, but it does mean that we need to make sure it's properly resourced.
Labour's justice spokesperson Jacinda Ardern. At least 25 people are reported to have been killed after a powerful earthquake hit Indonesia's Aceh province. The quake hit in the early hours of the morning local time and dozens of buildings have collapsed. The ABC's Adam Harvey reports.
The epicentre of the 6.5 magnitude earthquake was southeast of the city of Banda Aceh, with Indonesian television showing buildings collapsed throughout the regency of Pidi Jaya. At least one mosque was flattened in the pre-dawn quake. The earthquake struck just after 5 a.m. local time, and the death toll has been climbing throughout the morning. Rescue teams are continuing to look for anyone trapped in the rubble.
Adam Harvey. President-elect Donald Trump has laid out a United States military policy that would avoid interventions in foreign conflicts and instead focus heavily on defeating Islamic State. In the latest stop on a thank you tour of states critical to his election win, Trump spoke to a large crowd near the Fort Bragg military base, which has deployed soldiers to 90 countries around the world. Mr Trump vowed to rebuild the US military, but also said America needed to stop investing in destructive cycles of war.
We will stop racing to topple foreign, and you understand this, foreign regimes that we know nothing about, that we shouldn't be involved with. Instead, our focus must be on defeating terrorism and destroying ISIS.
Donald Trump also introduced his choice for Defence Secretary, General James Mattis, known as Mad Dog, to the crowd. New figures show serious disruption for Wellington office workers from last month's earthquakes. Meanwhile, Wellington City Council has new powers to help the capital recover. Eric Frickberg reports.
The new figures show more than 11% of all office space in the central city was shut down. That's more than 167,000 square metres. 50 tenancies were disrupted, and property experts say the race to find new accommodation rapidly used up all available quality property in the capital, with leases signed for up to 2 years. Meanwhile, the Wellington City Council is set to crack down on building owners who don't assess their property for earthquake vulnerability or make that information available. This follows new powers from the Minister of Civil Defence, Jerry Brownlee. The Property Council says it's got no problem with the council's new authority, saying public safety is paramount. This is Eric Frickberg.
The father of Scott Watson says the double murderer's parole chances are caught in a catch-22 situation. The parole board yesterday reserved its decision on whether to free Watson, who's serving a life sentence for the killing of Olivia Hope and Ben Smart in the early hours of New Year's Day 1998. Scott Watson's father, Chris Watson, was at the Rolleston prison hearing yesterday. He says the 45-year-old has not been allowed onto rehabilitation courses because he denies his guilt. Mr Watson says it's a catch-22, which seems illogical to him. The parole board is expected to reveal its decision in a fortnight. Horowhenua residents want their councillors to explain why they're going to roll the deputy mayor. Ross Campbell is likely to be stripped of his role by a majority of councillors at today's district council meeting, just a month after he was appointed. Lou Roloff told councillors their proposal is ill-advised and has the potential to polarise public opinion. Mr Roloff says getting rid of the deputy mayor is a travesty against the principles of governance and representation. Councillors, excluding Deputy Mayor Ross Campbell, have adjourned for a private discussion with the Mayor, Michael Fayan, ahead of the vote. It's 6:05. To sport, and the New Zealand cricketers are feeling the backlash of Australia's recent Test series loss to South Africa. The Australians won back the Chapel Hadley one-day trophy after a 116-run win over the Black Caps in Canberra last night for a 2-0 series win. The Australians were completely outplayed in their first two tests against South Africa last month, and batsman David Warner says that helped bring the players together.
It really hurt us down in Hobart, and losing that series on our home soil, it really does hurt. So I think it's probably the kick in the backside that we needed to get us back up and going, and we don't really want to lose too many series at home especially.
David Warner. The International Cricket Council will hold the South African cricket captain Faf du Plessis' appeal hearing over his ball tampering incident on December the 19th. Du Plessis was fined his match fee from the second test against Australia in Hobart after he was seen applying saliva to the ball with a mint in his mouth. For the first time in 5 years, Arsenal have finished top of their group in the Champions League after beating Basel 4-1 in Switzerland. Manchester City, who already qualified, drew with Celtic, while Barcelona beat Borussia Mönchengladbach 4-0. Napoli beat Benfica 2-1, and both teams will advance to the last 16. That's the news.
Stinging attacks.
Judith Collins, to my eyes, is utterly unsuitable to be the leader of New Zealand.
Returning fire.
As for Nicky Hager, honestly, he's gone after Helen Clark, he's gone after John Key, he's gone after me. And I actually think he's got no credibility.
Swimming with the sharks.
Yes, here to swim with the sharks, have a good day and get on with the rest of the holiday.
Fishing for answers. Morning reports with Susie Ferguson and Guy Aspinall, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, Labour leader Andrew Little on the prospects for the party in 2017 and how he intends to connect with Middle New Zealand in a post-Key world. And after 10, Hako Brown discusses Ngā Taonga Tākaro, or traditional Māori games, from their ancient origins to their exciting revival. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Wellington, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, the Central High Country and Wairarapa. Cloud increasing today, rain spreading from the west overnight, then turning to a few showers tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay fine today with increasing high cloud, scattered rain tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, patchy rain, heavier and more persistent about the Sounds and Western Ranges, easing to isolated showers later tomorrow. Nelson, Buller and Westland, rain with heavy falls, clearing overnight or early tomorrow. Fine spells increasing tomorrow, but isolated showers persist in Nelson. Fiordland, remaining rain, clearing this evening, fine tomorrow. Otago and Southland, cloudy today with scattered showers, becoming fine tomorrow, but cloud persisting about central Otago. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy, rain developing tomorrow night. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. The National Party leadership dance took a new turn today when Cabinet Ministers Paula Bennett and Simon Bridges both announced they wanted to pair up with Bill English to serve as his deputy. Now, this is interesting on two levels. One, because there are two now on-the-record contenders for the position of deputy, but the second level it is interesting on is that they are both backing Bill English. Now, we've previously heard, including from Matthew Hooton on our program last night, that senior Cabinet Ministers are backing English, but there was a sense that the youngsters, and both Bridges and Bennett are in their 40s, might have been shopping around for change. That we understand, in fact, explicitly, we know is not the case. They are behind English too, and it is increasingly apparent English is getting the numbers. Mr English is fighting off Health Minister Jonathan Coleman and Corrections Minister Judith Collins. It is a three-way leadership contest. The three-term Tauranga MP, Simon Bridges, who holds the transport and energy portfolios, stepped out of the blocks first.
We have a clear view emerging that Bill English is the best person for the job by a long way. But that things can't stay exactly as they are. This was no longer the John Key-led government to make a statement of the bleedingly obvious, and that there is a need for some change and rejuvenation, and that's based on which I stand. Obviously, much more broadly than that, I also think I've got a strong set of skills and attributes and values that I bring to this.
So then Simon Bridges was asked about raising the age of eligibility for superannuation, something John Key obviously has emphatically ruled out.
I mean, I'm not trying to be cute with you. I think in terms of substantive, difficult policy issues like superannuation, like the social issues that Katie has raised, they're matters for a caucus. I'm not going to come out today with some grand pronouncements of them. My broad assessment on that is that actually what all of the evidence shows is down the track, in the 2020s, there will need to be change. That's not something that's on us right now.
Simon Bridges. Later, it was Social Housing Minister Paula Bennett's turn. She's worked closely with Bill English on social housing and finance. Speaking to reporters, Paula Bennett described her relationship with Bill English as fantastic.
Oh look, I've got a fantastic relationship with Bill. I've worked really well with him for many years. Him and I have been absolutely invested in the social investment approach amongst other things. I do see myself working really well with him, and it's up to Bill to make a
Simon Bridges says he'd be better than you. He says he would be a better Deputy Prime Minister than you. Would you be better than him?
Oh, I'm just going to talk to let my caucus colleagues decide that. I reckon I've got something to offer. I'm pretty excited about the opportunity. I want to put myself forward, but I'm going to have those conversations with my caucus colleagues.
Sorry, do you represent change? Because he says that you're part of the kitchen cabinet, whereas he would be real change.
Oh, that's interesting. I think I am. I'm definitely someone that's a bit different, and I think that I've been 2 years now in the kitchen cabinet. That's given me a really richness of experience. But I don't know, I bring an energy, I've got an enthusiasm, I just love people, I love this country.
That was Paula Bennett. She's Upper Harbour MP. That's material, by the way, because that is an Auckland electorate. Simon Bridges from Tauranga, Bill English, of course, from the South Island and from Wellington. And it is seen as essential, given that 1 voter in 3 lives in Auckland, that there is representation at the highest ranks of the National Party cabinet. We're joined on the phone now by Michelle Bogue, former National Party president, to discuss the fact that the numbers do seem to be falling behind your preferred cabinet candidate, I think, Michelle, and it's nice to have you back with us. Bill English, he's your man, isn't he? And he's increasingly the caucus favourite, it appears?
Well, not only that, actually, I've been out and about in the business community today, and there's overwhelming support for Bill. I don't think it's a great surprise because he's very well connected to the business community. They have a lot of respect for him. He's widely acknowledged as the policy architect of the government, which I've said before, and the major innovations in policy terms have been ones that he's put in place. But I think being so sort of overwhelmingly to be seen in charge, I think will have an impact. I think people will now start to turn their attention more to the deputy position.
Yes, and so Both Bridges and Bennett are ambitious, and they both have strengths and, I guess, weaknesses. Bennett's looked vulnerable on occasions around social housing, but she is a woman, obviously, and an Auckland MP. And National needs to address imbalances in both those areas, surely.
Well, Paula is not only a woman, she's also a part Maori woman. But I think the thing about Paula is that she's very empathetic. Paula's not afraid to be emotional.
Is that your experience of her? Has she always looked empathetic around social housing? Has she looked empathetic when a marae in Auckland started housing the homeless? Has she looked as engaged and empathetic as you might hope?
Well, she is as a person. I mean, she's a very open and warm person. Now, having said that, you know, I think there may well be more declarations for the deputy position because there is a lot of talent at that second level. So I wouldn't say it's a slam dunk, but I think people will now be thinking about, okay, you've got Bill, he's very rational, he's very solid, people respect him. What do you need to complement the skills that he has?
You say you've got Bill. Do you think it's a done deal now? Is it getting close to so? And certainly, and we've been calling around today, there does seem to be well and truly majority support for Bill English. What sort of numbers are you hearing?
I think it will definitely be a first ballot decision with Bill. I mean, I think it'll be overwhelmingly a first ballot decision.
Right, so we will have a new Prime Minister fairly early on Monday.
Look, I think as soon as they have that contest, you know, everyone wants the result as quickly as possible. So as soon as they have the meeting, the whole process is probably only going to take about 20 minutes, maybe half an hour. Why would they keep the world waiting?
Yeah. And in terms of the deputy, you said there may be others yet to come forward. Have you got any idea who they might be?
I think there's a number of people who might stake a claim. I think the point you made about geography may mean that Amy Adams decides to sit this one out.
Because she's another rural South Island MP, albeit she is highly regarded by her caucus colleagues, right?
Highly regarded,
yep.
Very competent,
yep.
Very safe pair of hands. But, hey, Amy's got plenty of time. It looks like Stephen Joyce is going to be happy with his likely appointment as the Minister of Finance. That makes sense. And why would you put that at risk by then, you know, competing in another area where actually you probably don't need to be? I mean, let's face it, Minister of Finance is a very key position in any government. And I think it's probably always been Stephen's ambition. So he'll be very happy with that. I don't think we'll see him putting his hat in the ring. But there could be others. You know, there are plenty of others out there. The question is if Coleman and
Judith
Collins don't win, will they then throw their hat in the ring for deputy in the next round? Because I don't know whether they're probably entitled to. And
both Auckland MPs.
Yeah, so, we could end up having 5 or 6 candidates for deputy, which might make it difficult to get a first ballot decision.
Michelle Bogue, former National Party president, and a person with her ear to the wall, so to speak, joining us live there. And there is an increasing sense that Bill English is emerging well and truly as the front runner, with the other two, Collins and Coleman, quite a way back. I'm just going to turn the mic off and have a bit of a cough. Excuse me, it's 17 minutes past 6. A court has been told how an actor kissed and touched and performed sex acts on his students during private acting classes. The actor, who has name suppression, is facing 12 sexual assault charges before a jury at the Auckland District Court. Our reporter Eva Corlett was there today and joins me in the studio. Hi Eva, welcome. What has the actor been accused of?
Well, he's been accused of intimately touching some of his students without permission, allegedly. It's come down to charges that are 10 indecent assault charges and 2 charges of unlawful sexual connection. So there are 4 complainants in the case, all women. They were all young women at the time of the classes, which were between 2010 and 2013. And some background is that these women are all signed up to a modelling agency. They were signed up to an acting component of that, and he was the teacher for those classes. So they would undergo a screen test, he would invite them to group classes, and from there it's alleged that he would pick out some students to offer private one-on-one tuition. Mostly citing because they had potential and that they needed a little bit of extra attention.
Right, heavy suppression orders around this, but who did the court hear from today?
Well, the court heard the opening statements from both the prosecution and the defence, and after that they heard from the first claimant. The first claimant was 21 when she started the classes. She was invited to take part in the group classes, and from there she was picked out and again told that she had a lot of potential, that she needed a little bit more attention. So she began private classes, and within these classes there is a particular exercise the accused would use as an acting relaxation exercise, and that was called the push me, pull me exercise. And that consisted of sort of a person or the partner giving an action, the person responding, and you would try and meet the energy. So an example, if someone stood up and danced and shouted, you would meet that with a similar action. In this case, what started as light tapping, she says, eventually progressed into kissing, and from there, more serious sexual acts.
Right. Obviously, the defence are rejecting all of this. What are the Crown and Defence saying? Have they both opened? They obviously have.
They've both opened. The Crown argues that the actor behaved quite methodically and manipulatively when it came to teaching these students who were younger than him and had used these particular classes or exercises as a way to create intimacy. That he convinced them that it was necessary for their career to progress, that they took part in these exercises. The Crown prosecutor, Claire Patterson, says that the women did not give their consent to being touched in the manner that he touched them. The counsel for defence, Ron Mansfield, he says that the women gave informed consent, that they knew the nature of the classes, and that this is a way for one of the women to take revenge after a romantic relationship that evolved between the first complainant and the accused evolved. So he says that while the accused does agree that he kissed and touched the complainants, that he never touched their breasts or genitals.
Right, what next?
Well, the trial is expected to continue for about 2 weeks. Tomorrow the first complainant will be cross-examined by defence, and during the next 2 weeks there'll be a number of witnesses called, including some quite well-known New Zealand actors.
Right. Eva Corlett, thank you very much indeed. Eva, who was in the court today. One of the most unusual events in the life of the State Services Commission came to a costly conclusion today, although the exact cost is unknown. What is known is that the new State Services Commissioner, Peter Hughes, has apologised to 2 former senior diplomats, Nigel Fife and Derek Leask, for what was called the Rebstock investigation and the SSC's handling of it. It sounds like the inner machinations of the most remote corners of the Wellington Civil Service, but it's bigger than that. The Rebstock report for the State Services Commission looked at leaked MFAT documents and where they had come from. I quote now from former Ombudsman Ron Patterson, who was highly critical of the Rebstock report. Publication of a flawed report caused significant damage to Mr Leask's reputation and resulted in serious, unwarranted and adverse professional, personal and financial consequences for him. Now, the new Commissioner has offered a public apology and the 2 men will be paid costs and compensation. So, how did Paula Rebstock and the previous Commissioner get this so wrong? Paula Rebstock declined an interview, as she did after the Ombudsman's report came out. So I asked Derek Leask himself.
I simply don't have an answer to that, John, and I've often pondered that, but I don't have an answer and I don't want to start speculating. What I'm focusing on right now is the fact that we have had a new look at this by the new State Services Commissioner. He has recognised what the Ombudsman said, and he has accepted that. He's accepted the findings and the recommendations, and those have been implemented so that the proper thing has now been done, and I must say I'm very pleased about that.
The proper thing has now been done twice, because you have received complete exoneration from the Ombudsman in the first instance, and then today from the State Services Commissioner. And so that tells us that in fact Paula Rebstock and Ian Rennie were spectacularly wrong.
I simply do not know what the range of forces were or the range of abilities were that produced this spectacularly, as you call it, wrong result. But the Ombudsman investigated all of that, and he came out very clearly in my favour. I felt thoroughly vindicated just in June this year. And so today is really about something a bit different from that, and that is that now, instead of thumbing their nose at the Ombudsman, which is what happened in June, the State Services Commission is in effect apologising for the Rebstock investigation and for the State Services Commission's administration and management of that.
Yes, you say the State Services Commission thumbed their nose at the Ombudsman's report. Of course, the State Services Commission is under new management now. That's material, isn't it? I mean, that's why you've got this explicit apology and payment.
Well, one has to assume that that the initial response that was given by the State Services Commission in June would have meant that, left under that leadership, that we would not have had the appropriate response that we've had today.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but that is precisely the opposite of what the State Services Commission exists to do. I mean, the State Services Commission cannot be subjective. It cannot hold grudges. It cannot be personal. And yet the very clear inference of all of this is that under the old leadership, you were kind of doomed. Justice was going to be denied. It took a change of leadership for you to get what was coming to you.
Yes, I don't know just quite what avenues would have been pursued under the old regime, but the good thing is that I don't have to speculate about that. We got the sort of responses out of the State Services Commission which are appropriate, so that's good.
Very good, and according to the Ombudsman, very due and very fair and very reasonable. I know the settlement is confidential. Can you talk about it in any way, shape or form?
I certainly am not able to talk about the financial settlement. That is confidential and personal, and I won't be talking about that. But of course, Peter Hughes, the State Services Commissioner, has given a press conference today, and he gave some considerable details of what's in that settlement. The apology was very much part of that settlement, and that's what we had today, is an unreserved apology. We also have had there today the formal withdrawal of all of the criticisms made in the Rebstock report against Nigel Fife and me. A withdrawal is a hugely important thing.
In your opinion, and I'm sensing such a profound decency and courtesy about you that I fear you're not going to answer this question, but you know, God loves a trier. Should Paula Rebstock ever be asked to do this kind of work for the government again?
I'm not going to answer that other than to say that I do not believe she was a good fit for this particular job.
Derek Leask, we would love to have Paula Rebstock on the program. We keep saying that for balance and to find out what was going on here, and we can't get her to appear. It's 6:27. Indonesia has been hit by a strong quake and at least 25 people are reported to have been killed. It was shallow, 6.5 magnitude, and it hit just after 5 a.m. local time. Dozens of buildings have been destroyed and rescue teams are searching in the rubble. CNN correspondent Kathy Kianau spoke to the network about the latest.
It was just confirmed that 26 people died in this quake. Dozens more were injured, and more people are believed to be still trapped under the rubble. Scores of homes, shop houses, buildings, and mosques were totally or partially damaged by the quake. We're hearing reports from our affiliate, CNN Indonesia, that at least one person was just pulled out of a collapsed building in the district of Pidi. Now, that person did not survive, unfortunately. The quake hit the districts of Pidi and Birun at just past 5 a.m. as residents were preparing for early morning prayers. And as you said, they all panicked and fled from their homes. The quake was very, very shallow, and that's why you didn't see a tsunami warning being issued. It was a depth of only 10 kilometers, and it happened inland, so that's why we're seeing a lot of damage to infrastructure. The areas hit are not highly urbanized. Most of the structures are low-rise homes and shop houses. Buildings are only a few stories high. The local governments of Aceh and the central government have sent in help. Teams and heavy equipment for rescue efforts are all going in. The social welfare ministry is also sending basic supplies and medicine. And President Joko Widodo himself has ordered immediate assistance and provisions to be brought to Aceh.
That's Kathy Kiano, who is speaking to CNN with the latest, bringing the program to an end for tonight. Just a reminder, of course, the National Party caucus will select the new leader of the party and therefore the new Prime Minister of the country on Monday. The candidates, Bill English, Judith Collins and Jonathan Coleman. Bill English has very clearly emerged as overwhelmingly the front runner. We will be in Wellington for that on Monday. I will host the program from there, and we will be talking to whoever the winner is and our new Prime Minister is on Checkpoint Live from Wellington on Monday night. That brings tonight's program Wednesday night to an end. Thank you for being with us. We will be back tomorrow night at 5. Until then, on behalf of our very fine team, a very good evening to you indeed.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. At least 2 cabinet ministers will contest the position of Deputy Leader of the National Party, Simon Bridges and Paula Bennett. Labour is welcoming the government's changes that will mean most 17-year-old offenders will be dealt with in the youth justice system. At least 25 people are dead after a powerful earthquake hit Indonesia's Aceh province. Donald Trump has laid out a military policy that would avoid interventions in foreign conflicts and instead focus heavily on defeating Islamic State. And Horowhenua district councillors have voted the Deputy Mayor, Ross Campbell, out of the position. Our next news and weather is at 7.
This week on Inside Out, we celebrate the very versatile bass player Bob Cranshaw. We evoke the sound of silence with